The Resolve telephone number will be put up at the end of the program. Welcome all of you to the show and thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Larry, I'll call you Larry for the program if you don't mind. What inspired you to write this book?
Well, I think what really inspired me was our own problem with infertility. In my book, I talk about how husbands and wives react very differently to infertility, and my wife and I were no exception. So I started to think first about that issue, and as infertility came to engulf more and more of our lives, I decided that a very good way to get my professional life back in gear was simply to combine it with my personal life. It was what I was reading about and thinking about anyway, and I figured, well, I might as well write about it too.
How many years did this kind of engulf your life?
We first started trying to have a child in 1981. We adopted my son in 1983. We just adopted a daughter this past February. So we've been dealing with infertility now for about 10 years.
Are you still trying to have
We are not trying. We have got the family we wanted, and we are very happy with the children we have, and we have long since stopped the medical pursuit of infertility.
First, Paula, what is an ectopic pregnancy?
An ectopic pregnancy is a pregnancy that doesn't develop in the uterus. It develops in the fallopian tube, and it's life-threatening. And you learn about it very early in a pregnancy, usually before 8 weeks, and it needs to be surgically removed. It's not a viable pregnancy.
How long have you been a couple who's been trying to have a child?
Well, we've been struggling with infertility, I guess, since 1987, when we were told that there might be a male factor involved in our infertility that was going to prevent us from getting pregnant, and we stopped trying to prevent pregnancy and figured we should start trying, and I got pregnant right away, and it was ectopic.
I see.
And then following that, I became pregnant 6 more times. All of them ended in very early miscarriage.
I guess, to say the least, this is a kind of a sad topic. Is it a hard topic or to talk about? Or?
Well, I think we talk about it a lot because of our involvement with Resolve. So, I mean, yes, it's a hard topic because it's so personal. But on the other side of the coin, you know, we share our experiences with others because others, a lot of people in Central Jersey, wherever, are going through similar experiences.
That's a good point. Before we even get into your personal, tell us about Resolve and what that's done for you. I'll ask
Paula.
Resolve has really brought us to a point where we don't feel alone with our infertility. It's a national group with local chapters in states all over the country that involves people who are struggling with infertility and adoption issues. They have monthly meetings with speakers on various topics of infertility and adoption. And our very first involvement with Resolve was an all-day-long symposium a couple of years ago, where we heard couples talking about infertility, professionals talking about it, and talking about adoption. And it was then that we decided that the only people that were happy at this whole conference were people who had adopted children. So we decided maybe that would be a way to get happy, and we decided to pursue, rather than pursue pregnancy at that time, we had one medical option left open to us, but before we pursued that, we wanted to be parents. And Resolve talks a lot about you know, just making those choices, deciding when enough is enough. It's a really wonderful organization that's been very helpful to us.
So you've gotten a lot of support from it, from yourself, Richard?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they have meetings where you talk about different issues and panel discussions. Looking at Resolve from the adoptive parents' point of view, they have a lot of good panel discussions. For example, they'll have an adult adopted person and perhaps a birth mother or the adoptive parents, and talk about the adoptive triangle and the people involved with that. And so it gives you a lot of information. I think particularly with adoption, there are a lot of myths out there and a lot of misunderstandings and just not understanding the adoptive process and the adoptive family. And I think that Resolve addresses a lot of those issues.
It also has a wonderful newsletter that comes out that really, for those who are less comfortable sharing openly, the newsletter provides a lot of information as well.
How is infertility defined?
The medical definition of infertility is 12 months of unprotected intercourse without a conception or a viable conception. But sometimes there are cases, not very many, sometimes there are cases where people are aware for other reasons that they have a medical condition that's going to prevent infertility.
What did you hope to accomplish with the book, Not Yet Pregnant?
I wanted to do several things for several audiences. For professional sociologists, I wanted to make a theoretical statement about healthcare issues, showing that health is never simply a biological issue, that the society we live in always shapes the way we experience our condition. For infertile couples, I hoped to help them by showing them that they're not crazy, that the things they're experiencing are common to other couples, that they're to be expected given the state of infertility research and the state of American society. And I guess my third audience would be healthcare professionals, and I hope to show them that there are certain needs, especially in the area of counseling and compassion, that infertile couples don't feel are being met. And I hope that this book will help infertile couples both by helping them understand their situation and also by giving medical professionals some impetus to change some of the things they do.
Men and women differ in their views of infertility, am I?
Very much so.
Tell us about that. That seems to be one of the central points in your book.
Yes, it's very central to my book, and it's one of the things that I think runs throughout the entire book. Infertility is a couple issue. Couples in American society are made up of two people who have been socialized very differently, who have very different values, and who have to learn somehow to communicate across a gulf of experience. Infertility is not one special thing in American society that couples differ on. It's one of many. The big difference I found is that women, on the most part, and again, you can always overgeneralize because there are always exceptions. For the most part, the wives I interviewed took infertility much more to heart than their husbands. They saw themselves as failures. They found that the experience of infertility was spoiling every aspect of their lives. They saw infertility as something that was not only horrible but also unescapable. It affected them at work. It affected them when they went grocery shopping. It affected them when they watched television. Husbands, I shouldn't say husbands were unaffected by infertility. A typical kind of response I got from husbands was, this isn't good. This is a bad break, but it's not the end of the world. If it weren't for my wife, I could handle this. I don't have to think about it at work. I can escape it. But it's making her miserable, and I love her very much. And how can I be happy when she's so miserable?
So it was more a part of the woman's identity, how
I
she
think so.
defined herself?
I think for women, infertility can be seen as a crucial part of identity. If I can't have a child, I'm a failure. What good am I? And I don't think husbands identified that closely with the parenthood role. Yes, they wanted to be fathers, but they felt they had other aspects of life that were still important to them.
How do you each respond to that? Do you feel that?
Well, I think that's probably mostly true. You know, you can become a parent, but for a man, certainly it's not carrying the baby, and that's not something that's ingrained in your thinking in growing up. I think it's very difficult. The infertility, whether it's with the woman or the man, is still something that, as a man, you deal with. Perhaps not on a minute-by-minute, day-to-day. I don't think, in my experience, I mean, it affected me greatly, but perhaps not every minute of the day. It wasn't weighing as heavily as it may have on Paula or has on Paula. I also think, and just again, my own experience, because there was a male factor involved, and for that brief time when that was an issue, I mean, it was resolved through surgery. I think I can empathize somewhat. I try to and maybe have a better perspective because of that. But certainly it's a painful experience, perhaps more painful for the woman.
For the woman.
I think that one thing that I came to understand through infertility is I did go through a lot of time where I felt that it was affecting me more, or I would be more upset. But I think what I learned about us was that I think in a couple you can't both fall apart at the same time.
Right.
And
This is a good point.
And I think that when I was falling apart, like you said, it's very, very difficult. It was very difficult for him to see me unhappy for more than an hour, or a day. It was like, okay, snap out of it. You had your miscarriage, it's over, let's go on. But what I would sometimes find that when I would start to feel better, I would notice that Rick would start to feel badly. And this is kind of a personal kind of difficult moment, but my last miscarriage, which was recently, I was feeling better in terms of when the miscarriage is over, I feel physically relieved because it's sort of a medical kind of crisis and it's scary. So that when it's over, I'm feeling like, okay, it's over, and I'm not in that physical kind of scary state. And it's at that point I remember coming in and finding Rick just sort of sitting on the floor of my son's room, next to his crib, and just being sad and feeling so grateful that we have our son, who has made a tremendous difference in our infertility process, tremendous difference. But just seeing his sadness that this didn't work out for us.
This is a very personal topic, and I just want to say again, thank you for sharing your experiences with us. Not to belabor the point, but what does it feel like to have a miscarriage? Is it a loss? Is it like you grieve for the loss of a child?
I think it's different for everyone. For me, at this point, I feel like I can't keep something alive inside me, and that's a real, a horrible feeling. Your hopes. I always say that infertility is very depressing. When you don't conceive month after month, that's very, very depressing. When you miscarry month after month, that's very traumatic, and I think that's different in the infertility kind of world. It's very traumatic. Your hopes go way up, and then they come dashing down. It's physically painful. It's not just like having your period. It's painful.
So how long are you going to? I mean, do you have a limit? No more, or how long will you keep trying?
Well, I think that those limits are very important to set limits for yourself, because you really, as a woman, could sort of keep trying until you're no longer producing eggs, and some women do try just really well into their 40s, and some women can do that. I couldn't do that. I needed to become a parent, and that's why we decided to adopt. But we do have one medical option left open to us. It's kind of complicated, but it involves being immunized with Rick's white blood cells. It's an immunologic procedure. They don't do it in many places in the country, but that's supposed to protect the fetus from me rejecting it. That's a hypothesis as to maybe why I'm miscarrying. I'm going to try that procedure. I haven't done it yet. I've been frightened to do it. I feel it's my last chance. If that doesn't work, then I'm going to put my fertility issues behind me, adopt another child, and deal with the grief that's remaining.
Is infertility increasing? You hear so many different things in the media. Is it increasing, or
infertility is not increasing as far as we know.
Mm-hmm.
Since the government started monitoring statistics and infertility in 1965, there hasn't been an increase. There has, on the other hand, been an increase in primary infertility. Primary infertility is infertility among people who've never had a child. So that in the past, more couples who are infertile already had children in the home when they discovered their infertility. And this change is primarily due to the fact that people are delaying childbearing and starting their families later,
Mm-hmm.
so that when they become infertile, they're more likely to be childless. I think what you're seeing in the media is a reflection of that trend. A couple who has no children is more likely to pursue medical treatment, more likely to be devastated than a couple that already has one or several children. And so that's what I think is happening there. Another thing, of course, that's giving the impression that there's more infertility is that since the early 70s, medical science has made great advances, first with the development of ovulatory drugs, and then with the development of the laparoscope, and now with the development of in vitro fertilization. Mm-hmm. There's so much more that can be done, and the experience of infertility is being transformed. 30 years ago, your doctor would have said, "I'm sorry, there's really nothing we can do." Today, you run out of money before you run out of options. Yeah. You can try for months and months and months and months, and that makes it very difficult for couples to draw a line. Sometimes you run out of options, but usually it's up to the couple to say, enough is enough, I can't go through this anymore, and that's a very hard thing.
Can a couple become addicted almost to the process of childbearing, or an overcommitment? Or
I don't like the term addicted because it suggests a pathology, and I think this is normal. But yes, it's very, the process comes in little bits. No couple would ever say, well, I think I'll do in vitro fertilization 9 times and then give up. But you don't make a decision that way. You say, I'll go on this drug for 2 months. And then the 2 months are up and you say, well, maybe another month. And then you say, well, maybe another month. And each step is a little step. And you keep saying to yourself, well, this is so important to me, how can I justify not doing one thing more? And so I have one couple who I interviewed where the woman went through 7 major tubal surgeries. That's a surgery that has a very little chance of success the first time around. And you can say that's addiction, but I wouldn't call it that. I would say that's a normal response to the condition.
What about any adverse effect on your relationship with each other? Has this problem ever been?
Well, I think in many ways it might have brought us closer together, the adversity of it all. Certainly there needs to be a lot of communication between the couple and talking about different options that are available, and just the adoption. I mean, we were very uncertain as to whether or not we would go through with an adoption early on until we went to the conference at Resolve. Sometimes we're not always in agreement. You know, Paula mentions that we're going to go through this one more procedure, and that's going to be it. You know, that's still negotiating, or it's not really being negotiated, but
those are the types of
things
that come up.
That come up, yeah.
You mentioned you had a medical procedure, an operation?
Yeah, I had it's called a varicocele operation, in which too much blood was flowing down to my testicles, and they essentially tie off a blood vessel. The problem was that the sperm didn't have enough motility to travel and meet the egg. That was resolved, obviously.
Are these humiliating experiences, or?
No, they're not humiliating. I mean, they're something that you deal with. It's
They're
it's
scary.
They're scary. I mean,
They're
this
scary.
is you know, the varicocele operation. I had it on both sides. It was under general anesthesia. It was an outpatient procedure, but I
Or
should have
same-day
said-
surgery.
Yeah.
But the
same day, not
recovery
outpatient.
timing.
Recovery time is a week.
Yeah.
And in each
Yeah,
procedure you do, it brings hope, and then that hope becomes dashed, you
Yeah.
know, in a sense. I mean, I think that Rick was always, whenever I would say to Rick that he was becoming, you know, this is before I'd read your book, you know, that he was
Right.
sort of responding in a typically male fashion, you know, wanting to kind of, rather than listen to my hurt and hear my hurt, he wanted to make it go away, and sometimes I just would want to hurt. And when I would tell him that that was happening, he would always really try to not be that way, and it was responsive to me in that way, I felt. I mean, I think it created a lot of stress because I was unhappy. We were unhappy a lot of the time, and when you're unhappy, you don't get along great.
That's true.
One of the things now that creates a tremendous amount of stress is you know, most people, when they become pregnant, it's a very joyful, happy experience. You know, that happened to us once, maybe twice. Now, when Paula gets pregnant,
Now you kind of.
it's a scary
on.
thing.
Yeah, I
you
hate
really-
it. I hate being
you
pregnant.
cannot enjoy the pregnancy.
No, it's
And-
waiting
and
for it
that's
to,
unfortunate.
yeah, it's like a
It's on
time
there.
bomb for me.
It's difficult.
What are some of the common reasons? Are there some common reasons why a couple is infertile?
There are some common medical problems that people have. In about 90% of the cases, we can find, or I should say medical science can find a problem. That leaves 10% of couples who just never know.
Why?
Nothing can be found, and they just don't know why. There are lots of different studies, and they all come out with conflicting percentages. I think a nice, not quite accurate, but easy to remember rule of thumb is that about a third of the cases are due to a problem in the wife, a third are due to a problem in the husband, and about a third are due to problems in both members of the couple. For men, you really only look at the sperm, and there are a number of reasons why sperm may not be being produced or may have low motility. The varicocele is a common problem. For women, common problems are ovulatory problems, which now there are drugs that work pretty well for ovulatory problems. There are possibility of tubal problems, blockage in the fallopian tubes. Now most of those people are offered in vitro fertilization. Endometriosis, which is the production of glandular tissue in the wrong parts of the body, is often related to infertility for reasons we're not really sure of. Those are some of the more common problems.
Is part of the problem a stigma attached to, is there a stigma attached to not bearing children or having a natural child? Or?
I think there's definitely a stigma attached. And I think people in the fertile world, as I call it, are constantly making the infertile feel inferior without really intending to. Most of the stigma comes from the assumption that getting pregnant and having children is something easy and simple that anybody can do. And couples find that people are constantly belittling their problem. They are told, oh, what's the matter? Don't you know how to do it? I can show you. They're told, why don't you relax and take a vacation?
Or adopt, you'll get pregnant.
Adopt, you'll get pregnant.
That's a myth, one of the myths you were
That is
talking
a
about.
myth.
Yes.
And the people who say those things, I think they're being helpful or cute. But it hurts very deeply for the infertile couple who feels bad enough that they can't live up to this norm in American society that a real adult is a parent. and then being told, well, it's all in your head, that
What-
just makes it worse.
Those are the things that you don't want to hear. What do you want to hear from other people? What are some things that you appreciate hearing from other people, or would you just prefer them not say anything about the subject?
Well, I think you would like them to show some understanding that it is a difficult process and not to make light of it. I think more than anything, that's what there's a lack of. They do belittle, I think, the experiences that we go through. They're not sensitive at family occasions or to how we're feeling. I'll give you a very quick example. We got a call the other night from my parents, my brother-in-law, my brother and my sister-in-law. She's pregnant now, and so they expect you to be, thrilled over that, another grandchild, another one to feel, and that's nice, and
Yes.
you are. But I don't think that they realize that that's really not happy news for us. I mean, it's happy for
Or it's
them.
hard to hear.
It's hard to hear, and again, that whole lack of understanding of our point of view. And they try and understand, but I think unless you go through it, it's very hard to be
And
aware.
that's helpful to hear from somebody. Somebody said that to me just today. She said, who has 3 children, and she said, I think that unless you go through it, I just have no idea what you've been through. And that's nice to hear somebody acknowledge how painful it really is.
And unfortunately, that's going to have to be it, and I want to thank you all for taking the time to join me today. And as I mentioned earlier, for more information about Resolve, call 617-643-2442. That's 617-643-2442. And if you'd like more information about today's program, please contact me, care of Common Concerns, Post Office Box 55597, Trenton, New Jersey 08638, or call 609-883-6537. Thank you for watching, and tune in next week for another edition of Common Concerns.